Hi folks, this is going to be my third and final video about gas tank installations, retrofits, leaking gas tanks, etc., etc. To make a long story short, I had a fuel leak. I blamed it on the tank because I basically couldn't see a leak anywhere else. I pulled the tank, I tested it, I could not find a leak. I then proceeded to retrofit the area around the tank with hard points so I could put on a removable cover. And finally, I was reinstalling the tank. During the process of reinstalling the tank, I was having difficulty getting this fitting to mate with the hoses because the weld bung here is not square. So it doesn't line up with the access holes in the wing. Note the differences in these two tubes, how this one comes out relatively straight. But you can't see, it's straight this way, but it's not straight this way. It angles a bit that way, and this one is decidedly bent down. When these tanks were built, these weld bungs deformed the metal, and none of them are perfectly true. And it's been a real pain in my ass, which is the reason why I'm here today, because I tried to install the tank. I was having difficulty getting this hose on, and I lifted the tank inside the wing, trying to get this point low enough to get my hoses on here, and I may have caused, I do believe I caused a secondary crack in the bottom of the wing tank. So it's sitting here, it's got 10 gallons of gas in it. This is 24 hours after I put the gas in. It's not leaking. I'm going to drain the gas into these into my two jerry cans. And let this thing air out a bit, and then I'm going to proceed to reinstall it. All the drag and anti-drag wires and all the aileron balance cable stuff has to be all redone again. I had patches on the front to cover the leading edge of the wing. I went through all that, and I got to go through it again. Even with the removable access panel, there's only, from the top side, there is only 1.5 inches between the gas tank and the hard points, the ribs here in the butt of the wing root to access the fuel fittings. So what I have done is I've made a couple of small access panels here that line up with the fuel ports in the tank. So there's one in the front of the wing and one in the back. And then the way I make these, this is a vinyl fabric. The way you do that is you cut it with a soldering iron. Heat the soldering iron up, you poke it through the material, and you move it very slowly, and it cuts a nice neat hole. And what's important about that is that it seals it so that you don't get any fraying or any chance of tearing of the fabric. So it cuts the hole and seals it all at the same time. Despite the fact that they're very small holes, the fuel fittings are right there. So even with a small hole like that, I'll be able to move the wrench in order to tighten or loosen the fittings. You know, it's a very significant amount because it's so close. So that's going to work really well. I wish I had been instructed or had known to do this when I built this thing in the first place. Yeah, so in conjunction with the holes that you see here, one there and one there, what I've had to do is glue in a piece of Lexan on the inside of the fabric here as a backing plate, and that will allow me to put sheet metal screws through the fabric, through those backing plates, and hold a small access cover in place. So this is my small access panel that's going to go on here, and it will fit like that. The fairing that mates into the door frame will hold this up on one side, and then I will put a screw through the front and through the back to hold this in place, and then it'll be easily removable. Once I move the screws, it'll just slide out from underneath this metal. Well, it's been a long time since I put these fuel fittings back together. Now, I saw how I had taken them apart, and what I wanted to do was make a system that was a little simpler. I wanted to get rid of the rubber hose. The problems I had with this tank is what led me to doing this in the first place. And it's just the serviceability. You cannot get at the fuel fittings on this thing. And what's worse is the workmanship on the tank itself is so bad at the rear fuel pickup. I'm just learning today how bad it really is. It's just really difficult for me to get this thing back together. Hard to explain. Well, it's not really that hard to explain. The problem is the bung is not welded perfectly square. It's welded such that pipe is offset. You can't get these connectors in unless they're perfectly square. So in the end, I am going to make things simpler. What I'm doing is I'm replacing this and this with a simple AN840 fitting. This will go directly in the tank, and this will go, the hose will go straight on there. It's got a shoulder on there to keep the fuel line on, and we'll get a hose clamp or two on here. So that's what I'm going to end up going with. Originally, the only opening I had was right here. Now I've got a little bit more room, but if you can see up in there, there's the gas tank right there. There's my brass mesh, and there's this AN840 fitting. So you can only see that much, 3/4 of an inch, where you can get a hose clamp on this barb fitting. So I'm going to put one wide hose clamp on there, and then we'll wrap this hose back the way it was, around in here, and then down onto this fuel line. And just to clarify my point, the bung hole is so bad in this tank that if I had someone here, I would just get them to push down on here, but I don't have a helper. So I've had to put a bolt in there and a ratchet strap to the rafters to lift this side of the tank to get the bung down far enough that this fuel fitting will line up such that I can actually A, install it, and B, get the hose on. Anyway, that's my struggle today. So at this stage, all the work on the right wing, tank and fuel line reinstallation is complete, including the 2 new access points here, front and rear. And I'm going through the process of copying the fuel modifications that I did on the right wing over to this side, to the left wing. Now, at this point, I do not intend to open up the top cover and remove this gas tank, but the changes I've made to the fuel pickups on the right wing, I'm going to apply to this wing. And to repeat what I did in the past, I have to remove the door in order to get at this fairing, which is here, which covers the only access point to the current fuel pickups in the system right now. They are in this small area here, about 1 inch to 1.25 inches between the wing root and the cabin. So, and then when I get at that, I will copy the access points there to move them outbound beyond the hard point here into the fabric, between the fabric in this soft area between the hard points and the tank itself. I will make access points in here in the front and the rear. But again, as I said before, in order to do that, I'm going to take the door off so that I can get this panel off so that I can get the fuel apart and then proceed. So the door is disconnected from the attach points, and the ratchet strap supports it for me until I'm able to get out and get a hold of it and remove it. Okay, so with the door off and that fairing off, we can see the fuel pickups. There's one connection right there for the front, and that's the rear connection for the back. I don't like the idea that they're in here and I have to take the door off and I have to take the fairing off in order to get at them. So, I mean, I could just replace the hoses and move on, but I think it would be prudent to make the right side and the left side the same, and I think it's going to make a lot more sense to move it out in here. So at this point, the easiest thing for me to do would be to cut two new pieces, put them on, connect the front from here to here, put my hose clamps on and be done. Connect the rear from here to here, put my hose clamps back on, and I'd be done. But I'm going to take it a step further. I want to do what I did on the other wing. So what I need to do now is mark the center of these hoses, get my soldering iron, and cut an access point before we go any further. And before I go any further means before I take this apart, because if that access isn't all it lives up to for what I hope, I may end up having to leave what I got. But let's take one step further and see what we find out. Pardon the generator noise. Here we go. We cut out the access hose. There's no room there whatsoever. It's not the same as the other side. See, on the other tank, this is hard, but there was an 1.5 inch gap here. This wing is not the same, and I guess the reason is because of the way the ribs are. I can't get up in there. There's just nothing. I'm gonna have to take and cut a piece of that metal right out. See, the thing is, the ribs are bent and turned this way, which takes away. On the other wing, the ribs are bent and the bent goes that way. This way, because they're the same, this one moves into this area close to the tank. So I'm gonna have to cut that out, and I'm gonna have to put a patch on here. C'est la vie. So we got the Dremel tool. We're going to see if we can cut these pieces of metal out. So if you take a look at this, you can see now I've got room here. There's the rib bent this way. And there's the fuel tank. So I can't even get my finger in there. But I'll be able to work in here and make my fuel fitting there. So just quickly, there's what that one looks like. This is the left wing. And you can see that the rib is bent. This is the flat side of the rib, and it's bent towards the fuel tank. So there's no room here. If we go over to the other side, see, the flat side of the rib is here, and it's bent away from the fuel tank. So there's the fuel tank and the fittings. Anyway, so far so good. The little Dremel tool worked really well on cutting that out. So these are what go inside the tank, and the rear and the front pickups. That line on there is a solder line that holds this mesh together. Onto the brass fitting. So this is a 3/8 pipe fitting here, which adapts to a quarter pipe for my fuel fitting. And yeah, so if it wasn't clear before, we're going from the wire mesh to an AN6 flared fitting to an AN6 AN840-6. So that's going to go in there, and this whole arrangement's going to go back in the tank, and then we're going to be putting rubber hose over there. That's what we're doing. I couldn't really show how I got this inserted, so I had the brass screen. It's a female connector. This is the male connector. I put the brass screen in and tightened it, and then this has to go in. And the way I did that is I take this on a screwdriver and then I put the tip of the screwdriver that is exposed there inside the other connector, and then it's quite simple to walk this forward and turn it while the screwdriver holds it very well centered. So that's how I get one way to get things started in tight spaces. Okay, and now for the moment of truth. Let's put some gas in this baby and see if we get no leaks. I haven't put the cover on permanently because I want to run this test and make sure that I'm not getting any fuel leaks. So I've got 10 gallons of gas. This is a 25-gallon tank. I'll put it all in this tank. Now it will half of it will cross feed to the other tank approximately. But in the short term, we'll get this thing close to half full. And that should port enough fuel up to the sight gauges, the front pickup, and obviously the rear pickup to see if we've got any issues with any of the new hose connections. So let's give it a go. I have changed the fittings on both sides, so ultimately one is important as the other. So first of all, we're going to get 10 gallons in here quickly as we can. Well, it's leaking. Not leaking from any of the hose fittings. It's leaking at a pretty good rate. So I'm back to square one. And no, this is not a repeat video. The tank was not leaking. I put it in, I had everything done, added the gasoline, and guess what? Fuel leak. I'm getting bubbles there. I'm not getting bubbles anywhere else. I put it on and it starts to, there we go. See those bubbles? That's the leak. We can see that there's clearly a crack right there. Well, I'm going to have to take it to a welder. I have not one, but two welds on the bottom of my gas tank. It was leaking here. I'm going to flip this over. Before I put it in the plane, we're going to put 10 gallons of gas in it. I'm going to let it sit here overnight. Actually, I'll probably check it today in about 8 or 9 hours after work on my way home. Hi folks. Well, I started working on this thing sometime in April. It's now almost the middle of June. I'm showing this angle because if you look at the photograph on my webpage, it's basically the same photo. And you can see on the left that it's all fabric over the gas tank. And on the right you can see that we've got the metal pieces there. We've got an inspection plate for the flaps and a removable panel for the gas tank. It's a bit asymmetric, but eventually one day I'll do the other side, but I am not in a hurry. So my goal now is to take this thing up for a flight and see how it is. The new panel's still in place, all the screws are there. Alright, let's put this puppy to bed.